The 1898 Wilmington Massacre.
The Wilmington Insurrection of 1898.
The 1898 coup, a massacre in America's history.
Wilmington race riot.
In 1898, when white supremacists staged a bloody coup.
The Wilmington Massacre of 1898.
The Wilmington Massacre of 1898. Known by several different names, this event marks a pivotal change in the American narrative, infamous for being the only successful coup d'etat within American history. This bloodied massacre would be marked by a violent white supremacist uprising in southeastern North Carolina, with the destruction of black-owned businesses, the murdering of up to 300 black residents, and up to 2,000 black Americans displaced. This event would serve as an abhorrent stain within Wilmington's history. Now, 122 years later, we ask the question, have the catastrophic effects created by this uprising rippled to a modern-day Wilmington NC? What are the continuing effects of the 1898 massacre? We explore this question and more with several public figures, activists, politicians, and prominent Black Americans connected to Wilmington, North Carolina.
My name is Rebecca Trammell. I moved here when I was like 4 years old. I grew up here. I went to high school here, graduated, moved around and came back. So the Wilmington is home. I am an advocate. I'm known as like an activist here. I find people who don't have a voice that's being heard, and then I amplify it. I mean, I think that there's just like this spirit that hangs over this place. Like it's like an immediate thing. So those of us who grew up with it, we're not as aware of it. But almost any Black person coming into this area immediately is like, what is wrong with this place? And I feel like it's good to have people from the outside coming in. You know, like I had a friend, she was an attorney, her father and her husband was an anesthesiologist and in Maryland, and she came down here and she made it like maybe a couple of years, and she was like, I am out of here. I hate this place. Another guy just last year, maybe 2 years ago, he was a commercial real estate agent, and he couldn't figure it out either. He couldn't put his finger on it. He's like, there's something wrong with this place. And like the way that people would treat them, like we're not necessarily expected to be equals. We're not expected to ascend here. And it was meant to be that way because that little fountain in the middle of 5th Street, I could be wrong about this. I need to research this, but somebody told me that the families, that those, the turtles, like the fountains represent the prominent families of Wilmington, and they made a pact that Black people would never rise in this town. And for the most part, they're pretty much right. I mean, there's Wilmington is made up by 18%. 18% of the 18% of the Wilmington population is African American, and over 40% of us live under the poverty line. So this guy comes in from, I don't know, California. He's like, what is wrong with this place? And I told him about 1898 and Wilmington on fire. He watches the video. He thanks me. He runs into me in the street, like, I don't know, maybe a couple months later. He goes, Rebecca, it immediately made everything make sense. That is what's wrong with this place. Like these ghosts are still howling. I mean, and it does, it like, it's a mind-numbing situation. Like how many Black people have we had in city council or county commissioners since the coup? There were more African Americans who are middle class. I bet a higher percentage of African Americans were in the middle class. I bet a higher percent, we know already that a higher percentage of our governing bodies represented African Americans in 1898 than they do right now. Go figure. We can't even get rid of these statues, these offensive statues. They happened after 1898. Took them till 2020 to take them down, only because they were scared that protesters were going to pull them and drag them into the Cape Fear River, which probably would have happened. You know, Wilmington that I've seen, it doesn't move out of anything except for fear. Like, they don't do it because it's right. They do it because they're afraid of the consequences.
My name is Fracaswell Hyman. I'm a writer and an actor at times, and father. One of the continuing impacts is how North Carolina voted in the last election. Wilmington actually has changed to blue, and I'm proud of that. But if you look at the whole state, Trump took it. And I think that is connected to the 1898 coup because of the white supremacists that led the crew and made an impact on the society here in North Carolina that is still a part of what we experience today. Look at the different neighborhoods in this town, and you can see where people are excluded because of the financial difficulties, the educational difficulties, and things like that, that have been as a result of the systemic racism.
One of the things you may have picked up on is that Wilmington is a segregated city. You know, in 2020, segregated, like segregation, does segregation exist? Yeah, look at Wilmington. And then when I say segregated city, you can look at the dynamics and the setup of city planning to see where blacks live in society, where blacks live in Wilmington, and where the white population lives in Wilmington. And there are sections of the black community in Wilmington. And when you see those sections, if you had the opportunity to get a drawing up in the air and look at Wilmington from above, and you put down markers where the black community is and where the white community is, you will see they're just pockets of the black community. It seems that it's a segregated society. The ramifications of 1898 play into how Wilmington is looked at and perceived in both the white community and in the black community. And it's amazing and starkly amazing how this comes into play. When we're having these conversations about 1898, what's coming out of that and what's coming out of George Floyd, you know, that there is a reckoning for these conversations to be had. We said, well, why we took the lead in that and why we're so aggressive with it, I'm talking about in the black community, is because we've been having these conversations. What took place with George Floyd upset us tremendously, and that is an immense understatement. We're saying that another black person was killed, you know, just haphazardly at the hands of the police. And so what are the ramifications of that? What makes that possible? What makes the death of George Floyd possible are some of the ramifications coming out of 1898. That is how black men are perceived, you know, relative to how crime is perceived in the city. And so that, you know, one of the interesting conversations that takes place in the community is that where crime is concerned, a number, and it could be a cliche, it can be some realness to this, is that where crime is concerned, you know, in these pockets of the black community, these are pockets of crime in the city of Wilmington. Well, depending on how you look at this, you know, that's not going to be true. But if you're of a particular mindset that blacks commit crimes, then that is what you're going to see. Opposite what goes on in the white community. And so these things that we're speaking about now, just in general, are some of the ramifications of 1898 and how they play off in Wilmington, that are issues of crime, that are issues of population. Those are instances of how education is played off here, and how issues of how we talk about race plays off. And so these ramifications come into play out of 1898 in Wilmington today.
The continuing effects of 1898 is that we still don't completely know the story of 1898. There's so much history that's lost, so many bodies that will never be found, names that will never be claimed. And just that simple disconnect has offset so many generations to come since that event. white racist or racist raised mindset, people are still in power, and the same structures from decision that was made during that time are still in play. The effects of 1898 to this day are reflected amongst the number of successful Black businesses and entrepreneurs compared to white businesses and entrepreneurs. The wage gap, owning gap is ridiculous. Everything is still affected from 1898 when they wanted to make sure Black people didn't prosper at a higher amount, when it came to being successful. And they've been able to keep the percentage of African American population down ever since. It went from 60% from before 1898 to 35, 39%, something like that after 1898, to now being like a whopping like 15, 18%. And I think they say like 80 to 90% of that 18% live in poverty here in Wilmington, North Carolina. And all of that is an effect of 1898 as they ran out the middle and upper class folks and some of the folks that were middle class that they didn't know about that stuck around. They scared them so much that they only operated to like a certain extent, almost like they had like this glass ceiling, like they had like this cap on how much success they could have in this town. And that curse has still lingered to this day. Like, there's still only a limited amount of success you can reach as a Black person here. I don't know the last self-made actual Black millionaire that actually existed here in Wilmington. A lot of the names of people that helped lead the coup are still leading businesses and leading and sitting in political chairs, not them exactly, but their last names of their descendants. There's foundations of people making buku's amount of money off of money that first started off of the backs and blood of African Americans that helped build this town. And this town helped build this nation. And nobody's doing a thing about it, except scholarly white people that, have the privilege to be able to write big books and have the time to be able to set aside to research for a long time. And now they get to go and make money off of the information, but still no Black families benefiting off of that. Even though the information is out there, there's still no benefits to the actual family members and the actual descendants and actual Black community that's actually being affected by it now,
Just totally shocked that one thought that came to my mind was, Jesus, I don't know how we even have anything in Wilmington now as Black people.
Right.
Because if you go from being the majority to, some people planning a coup, and then at the end of 3 days, you killed a number of people, we don't know how many. You ran a number of people out of town. You assaulted people. You intimidated people at the polls. All these things, and what we fight for currently. And to hear certain people say, "Oh, well, we've given you this, we've given you that." What about what you took? And so I'm highly surprised that we are dealing with this thing, whether we know it or not. And not just as a city, but as a state. This North Carolina was highly impacted by the events that took place on November the 10th, 1898. There were plenty of prominent Black people here in 1897, 1896, and 1895. And those people were run out of town or killed. It all matters. It's all very relative in everything that we see and everything that we do.